Hello, and welcome to Family Storytime. I'm Dan, and today we're going to read some stories about friendship, particularly one certain friendship, the one between Frog and Toad. Frog and Toad have been friends for over 50 years, which is a really long time. They've gone on a lot of adventures together and have had a lot of fun. So we're going to hear about some of those adventures today when we read Frog and Toad Are Friends by Arnold Lobel. That book was first published in 1970, and since then, many Frog and Toad books have been published, so we've gotten to read about a lot of their adventures and fun together. Do you have a friend? Maybe a best friend? Someone you like to laugh with and play with and spend time with? Well, then you know that friends are very important. So let's jump in and read our first story about Frog and Toad. Well, since it just turned spring not too long ago, the first story we're going to read about Frog and Toad is actually called Spring. Frog ran up the path to Toad's house. He knocked on the front door, but there was no answer. "Toad, Toad," shouted Frog, "wake up! It is spring!" "Blah," said a voice from inside the house. "Toad, Toad," cried Frog, "the sun is shining, the snow is melting, wake up!" "I am not here," said the voice. Frog walked into the house. It was dark. All the shutters were closed. "Toad, where are you?" called Frog. "Go away," said the voice from the corner of the room. Toad was lying in bed. He had pulled all the covers over his head. Frog pushed Toad out of the bed. He pushed him out of the house and out onto the front porch. Toad blinked in the bright sun. "Help," said Toad. "I cannot see anything." "Don't be silly," said Frog. "What you see is the clear light of April, and it means that we can begin a whole new year together, Toad." "Think of it," said Frog. "We'll skip through the meadows, and we'll run through the woods, and we'll swim in the river. In the evening, we will sit right here on this front porch, and we will count the stars." "You can count them, Frog," said Toad. "I will be too tired. I am going back to bed." Toad went back into the house. He got into the bed and pulled the covers over his head again. "But Toad," cried Frog, "you will miss all of the fun." "Listen, Frog," said Toad, "how long have I been asleep?" "You have been asleep since November," said Frog. "Well then," said Toad, "a little more sleep will not hurt me. Come back again and wake me up at about 1/2 May. Good night, Frog." "But Toad," said Frog, "I will be lonely until then." Toad did not answer. He had fallen asleep. Frog looked at Toad's calendar. The November page was still on top. Frog tore off the November page. He tore off the December page, and the January page, and the February page, and the March page. He came to the April page. Frog tore off the April page too. Then Frog ran back to Toad's bed. "Toad, Toad, wake up! It is May now!" "What?" said Toad. "Can it be May so soon?" "Yes," said Frog. "Look at your calendar." Toad looked at the calendar, and the May page was on top. "Why, it is May," said Toad, as he climbed out of bed. Then he and Frog ran outside to see how the world was looking in the spring. And there they go, hopping down the path. So in our next story, we're going to learn another part about friendship when people do things for each other to help each other. Let's get to it. Do you like getting mail? Maybe a card or a letter from a friend or a relative? Or do you ever get packages in the mail? That can be fun. Well, the next story is all about getting letters from friends, and it's called The Letter. Toad was sitting on his front porch. Frog came along and said, "What is the matter, Toad? You're looking sad." "Yes," said Toad, "this is my sad time of day. It's the time when I wait for the mail to come. It always makes me very unhappy." "Why is that?" asked Frog. Because I never get any mail," said Toad. Not ever? Asked Frog. No, never, said Toad. No one has ever sent me a letter. Every day my mailbox is empty. That is why waiting for the mail is a sad time for me. Frog and Toad sat on the porch, feeling sad together. Then Frog said, I have to go home now, Toad. There's something that I must do. So Frog hurried home. He found a pencil and a piece of paper, and he wrote on the paper. He put the paper in an envelope, and on the envelope he wrote, a letter for Toad. Frog ran out of his house. He saw a snail that he knew. Snail, said Frog, please take this letter to Toad's house and put it in his mailbox. Sure, said the snail, right away. Then Frog ran back to Toad's house. Toad was in bed taking a nap. Toad, said Frog, I think you should get up and wait for the mail some more. No, said Toad, I'm tired of waiting for the mail. Frog looked out the window at Toad's mailbox. The snail wasn't there yet. Toad, said Frog, you never know when someone may send you a letter. No, no, said Toad, I do not think anyone will send me a letter. Frog looked out the window. The snail wasn't there yet. But Toad, said Frog, someone may send you a letter today. Don't be silly, said Toad. No one has ever sent me a letter before, and no one will send me a letter today. Frog looked out the window, and the snail was still not there. Frog, why do you keep looking out the window? Asked Toad. Because now I am waiting for the mail, said Frog. But there will not be any, said Toad. Oh, yes, there will, said Frog, because I have sent you a letter. You have? Said Toad. What did you write in the letter? Frog said, I wrote, Dear Toad, I am glad that you are my best friend. Your best friend, Frog. Oh, said Toad, well, that makes a very good letter. Then Frog and Toad went out on the front porch to wait for the mail. They sat there, feeling happy together. Frog and Toad waited a long time. 4 days later, the snail got to Toad's house and gave him the letter from Frog. Toad was very pleased to have it. Did you like that story? Maybe you can brighten up someone's day by sending them a letter. Practice your writing and let them know that you're thinking of them. Well, now we're going to head down to the aquarium and see and learn about one of the creatures that live there.
Hi there! Dan's been reading some really fun tales to you today about Toad and Frog. And I think in the last one, Frog wrote a letter to Toad using a pencil. Well, we have a lot of pencils here in the library, but we also have a special creature with a name starting with a pencil as well. Let's find out what it is.
This is the pencil urchin. These tropical creatures are known for their spines, which stick out from their body in all directions. Several urchins call our aquarium home. Their spines are usually some shade of red, though they can also be brown, tan, or even a dull yellow. These spines act as a defense against potential predators. In the natural world, these urchins live in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, from the east coast of Africa all the way to the mid-Pacific Ocean, especially in the area around the Hawaiian Islands. They typically are found in reefs, ranging in depth from around 25 to 80 feet deep, and prefer areas with lots of coral and limestone. Hanging out in the coral can provide good camouflage for them. Urchins are generally sedentary creatures, meaning they like to stay in the same spot for long periods of time. Even though they have no eyes or legs, they can move around using hundreds of tiny tube-like feet. They also have a mouth which contains small teeth-like wedges for eating. Pencil urchins survive on a diet of algae and can grow to be around 5 or 6 inches in size.
Well, I hope you had fun learning about our pencil urchin in the aquarium. Now, back to Dan for some more tales.
And now we've arrived at our last story of the day. And this one is all about friends helping one another. It's called A Lost Button. Toad and Frog went for a long walk. They walked across a large meadow. They walked in the woods. They walked along the river. At last, they went back home to Toad's house. "Oh, drat," said Toad. "Not only do my feet hurt, but I have lost one of the buttons on my jacket." "Don't worry," said Frog. "We will go back to all the places where we walked. We will soon find your button." They walked back to the large meadow. They began to look for the button in the tall grass. "Here's your button," cried Frog. "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button is black. My button was white." Toad put the black button in his pocket. A sparrow flew down. "Excuse me," said the sparrow. "Did you lose a button? I found one." "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button has 2 holes. My button had 4 holes." Toad put the button with the 2 holes in his pocket. They went back to the woods and looked on the dark paths. "Here is your button," said Frog. "That is not my button," said Toad. "That button is small. My button was big." Toad put the small button in his pocket. A raccoon came out from behind a tree. "I heard that you were looking for a button," he said. "Here is one that I just found." "That is not my button," wailed Toad. "That button is square. My button was round." Toad put the square button in his pocket. Frog and Toad went back to the river. They looked for the button in the mud. "Here's your button," said Frog. "That is not my button," shouted Toad. "That button is thin. My button was thick." Toad put the thin button in his pocket. He was very angry. He jumped up and down and screamed, "The whole world is covered with buttons, and not one of them is mine!" Toad ran home and slammed the door. There, on the floor, he saw his white, 4-holed, big, round, thick button. "Oh," said Toad, "it was here the whole time. What a lot of trouble I made for Frog. So, Toad took all of the buttons out of his pocket that they had found. He took his sewing box down from the shelf, and Toad sewed the buttons all over his jacket. The next day, Toad gave his jacket to Frog. Frog thought that it was the most beautiful. He put it on and jumped for joy. None of the buttons fell off. Toad had sewed them all on very well. Well, before we go, let's go see Miss Taylor, who's going to talk about the new grab-and-go craft for the month of April.
Hey everybody, this is Taylor and I am here to talk about our April craft. So this month it's a pretty open-ended activity. It's called pasta sculptures. So we are going to give you a bag full of pasta and some other fun materials like scrapbook paper, some straws, you might even find a plate in there. And from there, we want you to either create a sculpture or a mosaic. This project was inspired by a famous artist and architect. His name was Antoni Gaudí. We're going to learn a little more about him. Antoni Gaudí was an architect known for color, mosaics, and out-of-the-box thinking. He was a Catalan architect, and his pieces of art are all throughout Barcelona, Spain. His work features dragons and sea monsters, magical forests, and his most famous work of art is still not finished. It is called La Sagrada Familia and is the most visited place in Barcelona. Houses that have dragon-like features, a bench that is shaped like a serpent, and chimneys that look like pieces of coral or fairy tale candy are all throughout Barcelona thanks to Gaudí. Use your imagination like Gaudí and create your very own pasta sculpture or mosaic. So that was a little bit about Antoni Gaudí and our very open-ended activity for the month of April. So grab a bag from any of our 9 MCPL locations starting April 1st through April 30th and create your own pasta sculpture.
Thanks again for joining us today for Family Story Time. I hope you enjoyed hearing all the stories about Frog and Toad and their friendship. Until next time, have a good day. Bye.